Shortly after midnight on March 19, 1961, a 42-foot motor launch called the Mercury reaches a small cove on the northern coast of Cuba. Palm trees, no lights, no sound. 5 Cubans and 1 American sit perfectly still in the darkness. They're listening for any signs of danger. Nothing. So they slip over the side of the boat into waist-deep water and they start unloading. They've got automatic rifles, Tommy guns, pistols, grenades, boxes of ammo. These men are part of a CIA squad that's been tasked with infiltrating Cuba ahead of a full-scale military invasion. They're contacting anti-Castro military officers on the ground and coordinating an uprising to coincide with an amphibious landing that's going to happen in less than a month. Now, there's a 25-year-old American named Angus McNair. He's from Coral Gables, Florida. A few nights earlier, he was at a party in a small white bungalow in Miami's Cuban section. The bungalow was a CIA safe house. About 20 people were there. A man named Frank Nelson, former Havana businessman and veteran Caribbean conspirator, he pulled McNair aside and asked him a question. "Aren't you afraid of a leak? I mean, with all these people knowing about your mission?" McNair said that they were all friends and relatives of the Cubans who were going with him. So he trusted them all. That was a mistake, because as McNair and his team wade through the black water towards the Cuban shoreline, searchlights snap on, blinding white light. Armed men spill onto the beach from every direction. More than 100 soldiers who've been waiting in the dark for them to land. Somebody at that going-away party talked. McNair and his team are captured. The other American on the mission, a 41-year-old CIA asset named Howard Anderson, who owned a chain of gas stations in Havana, well, he's arrested the same night on his way to rendezvous with McNair. Both Americans die at dawn before a firing squad. It's April 19, 1961. It's 2 days after the Bay of Pigs invasion begins. 7 Cubans are executed alongside them. Now, the operation that puts Angus McNair on that boat, the operation that trained him, equipped him, and sent him to die on a Cuban beach at the age of 25, it was called Operation 40. And what I'm about to tell you about it is going to connect Watergate, the Kennedy assassination, the execution of Che Guevara, the deadliest act of airline terrorism in the Western Hemisphere before September 11th, and one of the largest drug trafficking operations in American history. All of it traces back to the same group of men, the same CIA program created under President Eisenhower. It's overseen by Vice President Richard Nixon. And when a researcher filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the CIA in 2013 asking for everything they had on Operation 40, the agency handed over 7 pages. Then they said the magic words: "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of any other records." And for more than 60 years, we get 7 pages. And there's so much more to this story. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. This is Operation 40. Stay with me. Let's go back about a year before that boat landing. January 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution just overthrew the Batista government in Cuba. American corporations that were running the island, like Pepsi, Ford, Big Oil, the sugar companies, the casinos, they're watching their investments disappear overnight. And the Eisenhower administration is watching something worse: a communist-aligned government 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Now, inside the CIA, there's a man named Colonel J.C. King. He runs the Western Hemisphere division. And on December 11th, 1959, King sends a memo to CIA Director Allen Dulles that says something remarkable. He recommends, and I'm paraphrasing here, the elimination of Fidel Castro. His words. King writes that no other Cuban leader has the same appeal to the masses, and that many informed people believe that Castro's disappearance would greatly accelerate the fall of the government. Translation: kill Fidel and the revolution collapses. Now, Dulles passes King's memo to the National Security Council, and they approve the creation of a working group inside the CIA to come up with, quote, alternative solutions to the Cuban problem. That working group becomes Operation 40, and it takes its name from the special group of the National Security Council that's been formed to oversee the entire Cuba operation. Want to know who's on that special group? Vice President Richard Nixon, who's essentially the case officer for the whole project, CIA Director Allen Dulles, Admiral Burke, Livingston Merchant from the State Department, and National Security Advisor Gordon Gray. Now, if you've watched our MJ-12 video, that name should have hit you like a truck. Gordon Gray, the same man. He's on the MJ-12 membership list, and he's overseeing Operation 40. So on March 17, 1960, President Eisenhower signs a National Security Council directive approving what's officially called a Program of Covert Action Against the Castro Regime. That's Operation 40. And the man put in charge of the Cuba task force inside the CIA is a guy named Tracy Barnes. Barnes calls a meeting on January 18, 1960 at a place called Quarters Eyes. It's a Navy building near the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. And the people he assembles in that room are going to change the course of American history. Howard Hunt, future head of the Watergate burglary team and crime novelist on the side, David Atlee Phillips, psychological warfare expert, Frank Bender, a friend of the Dominican dictator Trujillo, and Jack Esterling, who just came from running a CIA operation in Venezuela. Barnes lays it all out. He explains that Vice President Nixon assembled a group of businessmen to help fund the operation. It's headed by Texas oilman George Bush and Jack Crichton. The goal is a full-spectrum assault on the Cuban government. I'm talking psychological warfare, diplomatic and economic pressure, clandestine operations inside the island, and a political front organization made up of Cuban exiles in Florida who go on to declare themselves the legitimate government once Castro fell. From the very beginning, the assassination of Fidel Castro and other Cuban leaders is one of the highest priorities. A team of professional hitmen is contacted by the CIA. Dozens of assassination plots are planned against Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and other revolutionary leaders. This isn't something that got added later. It's baked into the program from day one. So Hunt gets sent to Miami. His job is to build the political infrastructure, the exile front that'll give the whole thing a Cuban face. And his first move is to recruit a man named Bernard Barker. Remember that name. Barker is a CIA agent who recently helped a young Cuban exile named Manuel Artime escape from Cuba. He's connected, he's loyal, he's going to show up again in about 12 years inside the Watergate complex. But Hunt's got a problem. The Cuban exile community in Florida is a mess. You've got the old Batista crowd, former military officers, secret police, intelligence types. The intelligence types want the biggest share of whatever comes out because they've got the most organized structure. Then you've got the followers of former President Prio. And then you've got the newer exiles, the ones who actually fought against Batista but also turned against Castro. And they want nothing to do with the old regime's thugs. The CIA itself is split. Hunt is pushing the Batista faction because that's what Colonel King told him to do. Bender thinks that's insane because Batista's people have zero credibility in Cuba or anywhere else in Latin America, so they compromise. The political wing gets the non-Batista figurehead, the military and operational wing, that goes to the Batista guys. And the men who end up running the operational side of Operation 40 are Joaquim Sariñas, a former Castro aide who defected and became a CIA agent, and Felix Gutierrez. The operation runs out of a highly efficient office in Coral Gables, Florida. Recruits are selected with extreme care. They're screened for their anti-communist credentials, and they have to pass a lie detector test to prove it. The training facility is where it gets dark, because the recruits are taken to a school in a large private home about an hour outside of Miami. The initial lectures are pretty standard: intelligence gathering, how to identify communists, that sort of thing. But then a Cuban instructor shows up, and this guy talks openly about the need for torture, killing, close searches of civilians, and what he calls repressive gestures on the island. Several of the recruits quit on the spot. The instructor gets shipped to Guatemala before the invasion. The ones who stay report that after he left, the unit took on the feel of a straight-out intelligence outfit. But the ones who left, they told people what they heard. And that's how Operation 40 first starts leaking into the public record. When the Chattanooga Times breaks the story in 1961 through Washington correspondent Charles Bartlett, the paper reports that inductees were offered instruction in killing and torture, and that the unit's purpose was to seize control of the Cuban government after the invasion and establish a dictatorship, possibly under Captain Manuel Artime. Notably, the Times says that there's no evidence of CIA involvement. It's curious. There's a detail that even the people inside the operation didn't fully understand until it was too late. Operation 40 had two missions. The one they told the recruits about was infiltration and intelligence gathering, things like contact with anti-Castro military leaders, political leaders, underground people. But then there was a second mission, and that one was assassination, a mopping up operation designed to follow behind the invading troops, purge captured cities and towns, and eliminate anyone who might oppose the new government. This includes anti-Castro Cubans who weren't in the Batista camp. We know this because of a man named Manuel Rey, leader of the MRP, the People's Revolutionary Movement. He told the CIA exactly that. On May 18, 1961, just weeks after the Bay of Pigs, Ray sat down with officials in the offices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, and he told them that his own people, members of the MRP who were fighting Castro from the inside of Cuba, well, they were afraid that if the invasion succeeded, they'd be executed by the invading forces. He said he and his people learned about Operation 40 as a mopping up operation, which was designed to eliminate his followers. He says it was composed of followers of former President Batista who were going to follow behind the troops and purge the captured cities. And importantly, he named names: Sagenes, Gutierrez, and a man he called Calvinos, we described as a war criminal who participated in the invasion. Now, this isn't speculation. That's a classified CIA memo signed by J.C. King himself, chief of the Western Hemisphere Division, the same man who recommended killing Castro in the first place. So let's be clear about a few things. Operation 40 wasn't just an intelligence program, it was a political assassination machine. It was built inside the CIA and designed to install a friendly dictatorship in Cuba. It was staffed with former secret police and military officers from the old regime, and it was authorized at the highest levels of the United States government. So before those boats ever hit the water, Operation 40 is already running missions inside Cuba, and the biggest one involves a man named Major Humberto Soria Marin. Now, Marin's story is pretty wild. This guy is a former Havana lawyer who actually drafted the Castro Penal Code. That's the legal framework that made the firing squad executions legal. He'd been an adjunct general of Castro's army. He was presiding judge at the 1959 war crimes trials that sent hundreds of Batista loyalists to the firing squads. He was also Castro's first minister of agriculture. But by 1961, Marin turned against the regime. And he wasn't alone. His partners in the conspiracy included other Cuban Army, Navy, and Air Force commanders, the chief of Castro's secret police, the deputy finance minister, and the head of the Cuban Sugar Institute. Now, these are the big boys, the inner circle of Castro's own government, and they're plotting to overthrow him from the inside. Their plan is a military uprising timed to coincide with the Bay of Pigs landing, during which Castro and his communist advisors would be killed. And as soon as the CIA learns what they're up to, Operation 40 goes into action. Agents slip into Cuba, they contact the conspirators, and they ask them to coordinate the revolt with the invasion timeline. But a month before the coordinated strike is supposed to happen, the whole thing starts to fall apart. A militia patrol gets sent to the Miramar section of Havana to arrest a woman who's overheard complaining about food shortages. As the militia jeep pulls up to her house, she runs out the door and she flees to a nearby home of a retired engineer and his wife. The soldiers charge after her, they enter the engineer's house, and they just happen to burst into a room with about a dozen leaders of the military conspiracy that are seated around a table. The table's littered with Havana street maps, pinpointing locations of key installations that are about to be seized. The militia is outranked and outnumbered, so they hesitate, not sure what to do. Then Marin pulls out a pistol. A short burst from a Czech-made submachine gun wounds him in the leg and persuades him and his co-conspirators to surrender. They're hauled off to La Cabaña fortress for questioning. The internal uprising is finished before it starts, and the CIA squad that we talked about in the beginning of this episode, McNair and his crew for the Mercury, they're headed into a trap and they don't even know it. The invasion itself, April 17th, 1961, you probably know about it in broad strokes. About 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles, they land at the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. They're expecting air support that never comes. They're expecting a popular uprising that doesn't happen. Within 3 days, the brigade is destroyed. 114 dead, over 1,100 captured. It's a catastrophe, but there's something curious about the days surrounding that invasion. Between April 19th and April 20th, Castro's government executes captured conspirators. Angus McNair and Howard Anderson, the Americans from the beginning of this episode, they die before a firing squad on April 19th. 7 Cubans are executed with them, including Gilberto Balancourt, one of the leaders of a spearhead force that was sent from Cuba to invade Panama in 1959. He defected after that operation failed, and then he went to go work for the CIA. The next day, April 20th, 12 more anti-Castro plotters are executed. 7 of them are shot in the moat of La Cabaña fortress. Among them, Humberto Soria Marin, the man who wrote the laws that made firing squads legal. He dies in front of one. Is that karma or irony? And there's one more name in that group, a mysterious American citizen who called himself Rafael Diaz Bencom. He was employed by the CIA. He reportedly served as a liaison between Marin's group and the agency. So the CIA's inside man, the link between Operation 40 and the military conspiracy, is executed right alongside the conspirators he was handling. Got that? And through all this, there's a man named Frank Sturgis who's been at the center of Operation 40 from the very beginning. Sturgis is a World War II Marine combat veteran. That mission got exposed by the Guatemalan press, and Sturgis became a public figure whether the CIA liked it or not. Now, over the next year, the CIA trained Cuban recruits in Guatemala, Panama, Puerto Rico, and the United States. Sturgis personally trained about 50 Cubans in the Florida Everglades. And when he talks about Operation 40 years later, he's very careful. He says it was a top CIA project. He says that most of the men were Cubans who were trained by the US Army. When reporters ask him if Operation 40 had an assassination squad, he gives an answer that becomes famous in the research community. He says, "I'm not saying that Operation 40 had an assassination squad. There were reports that there was one, but I'm not saying so." Then he adds, the prime purpose was infiltration, not assassination. They were to infiltrate Cuba and contact anti-Castro military leaders, political leaders, and underground people. And he says they could kill if they had to, if it was really necessary. So infiltration, not necessarily assassination, but they could kill if they had to. Got that? Inside the CIA itself, there's a document that tells us how the agency handled allegations about Operation 40's true purpose. It's a cable from the Miami station, codenamed WAVE, and was sent to headquarters. The cable uses the CIA's internal cryptonyms. Kubark means the CIA. Odioke means the United States government. AMFAST, that's Operation 40, and the cable's discussing complaints that reached the exile leadership about a man the CIA calls Amat II, one of their key intelligence assets. The allegation is that Operation 40, AMFAST, was designed to eliminate people. The CIA's Miami office calls the story preposterous. They say the whole thing is the result of a personality clash between rival exile factions, and that the people making the accusations have their own problems, including the misappropriation of official funds. Translation? Don't look at the assassination program, look at the people complaining about it. Classic deflection. But it also tells us something else. The CIA's Miami station is worried that if they force Amat II out of the area based on these complaints, it'll set a dangerous precedent, because the exile leaders would use that tactic to push out anyone they don't like, including people working for the CIA and the US government. In other words, the infighting among these exile factions is so intense that the CIA can barely control its own operation, and the Bay of Pigs hasn't fixed it and made it worse, because the invasion failed. The political front collapsed. The internal uprising was crushed before it started, and the 2 Americans the CIA sent into Cuba ahead of the landing, they're dead. The Bay of Pigs was a disaster, but Operation 40? It didn't end. The networks didn't dissolve, and the operations didn't go home. They just went underground. With the Bay of Pigs being a humiliation, President Kennedy is furious. Publicly, the US government is backing away from Cuba. Privately, the exact opposite is happening, because November 1961, Kennedy authorizes something called Operation Mongoose. And this is where the Cuba operation goes from a covert program to an industrial scale machine. The man put in charge is General Edward Lansdale, a counterinsurgency specialist who made his reputation in the Philippines and Vietnam. And overseeing Lansdale is a new committee called the Special Group Augmented. Kind of a cool name. It's the same concept as the original special group that created Operation 40, but now it's got Attorney General Robert Kennedy personally driving it. Bobby Kennedy wants Castro gone, and he wants it yesterday. The special group Augmented includes CIA Director John McCone, who replaced Alan Dulles after the Bay of Pigs. Also National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and representatives from the Department of Defense. So we're looking at the White House, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the Justice Department all sitting around the same table, planning the destruction of the Cuban government. And the base of operations? A place called JMWave. It's a CIA station operating out of the University of Miami campus in South Florida. And by 1962, it's the largest CIA station in the world. 300 CIA officers, thousands of Cuban exile agents, a fleet of boats, planes, safe houses scattered across South Florida, front companies, weapons caches, radio equipment. They got an annual budget of hundreds of millions, all dedicated to one thing: overthrowing Fidel Castro. And the men who were running operations for Operation 40 before the Bay of Pigs, they're all still here. Same operatives, same networks, same mission, just a bigger budget and a new name on the paperwork. One of the crown jewels of JMWave is a ship called the Rex. The Rex is a 175-foot converted U.S. Navy patrol boat. It flies the Nicaraguan flag and operates out of West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. And it carries the latest radar and sonar equipment, 5 cannons, several 30-caliber machine guns, and 2 20-foot speedboats. The skipper is reportedly a man named Eugenio Rolando Martinez. Remember that name too. Martinez is a Miami real estate salesman and a CIA agent who made more than 300 nocturnal runs to Cuba. 300! He's taken off the official CIA payroll in 1972, the day after he's caught in the Watergate break-in. We're going to circle back to that one. The Rex and its speedboats are constantly running clandestine missions to Cuba from 62 to 63. They're dropping off agents, they're picking up intelligence, they're conducting sabotage operations, and the assassination plots against Castro, they haven't slowed down. They've multiplied. The CIA's been working with the mafia since 1960 to try to kill Castro. That's the official finding of the Church Committee in 1975. The agency recruited mob figures like Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, all of whom lost their lucrative casino operations when Castro took power. Things like poison pills, poisoned cigars, exploding seashells, a contaminated diving suit. The plots are so bizarre, they'd be funny if they weren't real. And running through all of it, the same names as Operation 40. David Phillips is handling the psychological warfare and propaganda out of JMWave. David Morales, a man they call El Indio, is Phillips' top action officer. Howard Hunt is coordinating political operations with the exile groups. Ted Shackley arrives as chief of JMWave in 1962, and he brings a man named Thomas Kleins with him. Like with most of these guys, these names are going to come back. Every single one. In an April 1963 briefing to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, a CIA officer named Desmond Fitzgerald gives a presentation on operations in Cuba, and the numbers tell a real story. He says they've got resident agents, illegal teams, legal teams, shipboard agents. They're all operating on the island. But when asked about the modest number of agents, Fitzgerald says that it's not for lack of effort. It's because of the high attrition rate and the dangers involved in the whole thing. He goes over the list of what happened to the agents they put in. Castro broke up the large countrywide resistance networks that previous summer, and what's left are small bands scattered throughout the island. And the policy at that point has been scaled back to what Fitzgerald calls subtle sabotage. Fitzgerald describes it as tying a rock with wire and throwing it across high-tension lines. That's what a multi-$100-million covert operation has been reduced to. Rocks on wires. But here's the relevance to our story. The operational infrastructure doesn't go away. The boats are still running. The agents are still deployed. The exile networks in Miami are still intact. And the men who built Operation 40, the assassins, the spies, the propagandists, the political operators, they're still in the game. By late 1963, the Kennedy administration starts pulling back on Mongoose. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of '62 changed the calculus. Kennedy made a deal with the Soviets. No invasion of Cuba in exchange for removing the missiles. The large-scale operation winds down, but the networks don't, because you can't build a machine like this and then just turn it off. These men were trained to kill, to sabotage, to overthrow governments. They've been promised that Cuba would be liberated, and now they're being told to stand down. Some of them do, most of them don't. And by the mid-60s, these operatives start showing up in places that have nothing to do with Cuba. In fact, they start showing up everywhere. And when you see where they show up and what they've been doing when they get there, you're gonna understand why the CIA only gave us 7 pages. So by the early 70s, Operation 40 is officially dead. The story goes that it ended when a plane carrying cocaine and heroin crashed somewhere in the Caribbean, and the drugs were allegedly funding the group's continued operations. The CIA quietly dissolved it. No press conference, no congressional hearing, just gone. It's strange because on June 17, 1972, 5 men are arrested in the Democratic National Convention headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C., and when the police run their names, it reads like an Operation 40 reunion. Frank Sturgis, the same dude who trained 50 Cubans in the Florida Everglades for the Bay of Pigs, the same Frank Sturgis who described Operation 40 as a top CIA project and gave the careful answer about assassination squads. Then there's Bernard Barker, the same guy Howard Hunt recruited in Miami back in 1960 to build the Exile Political Front, the same man who helped Manuel Artemay escape from Cuba. How about Eugene Martinez, the skipper of the Rex, the man who made over 300 secret runs to Cuba? And guess what? Martinez is still on the CIA payroll the night he's arrested at Watergate. He's still on their payroll. He's never been taken off. The agency's been paying him a monthly retainer for over a decade. We also have Virgilio Gonzalez, a Cuban exile locksmith, and Rolando Pardo, who goes by the name Frank Fiorini on some documents, and the man running the whole operation from outside the building, E. Howard Hunt, the same Howard Hunt who sat in Tracy Barnes' office at Quarters Eye in January of 1960, the meeting where Operation 40 was put together, the man who built the exile political front in Miami. He recruited Barker. He coordinated political operations out of JMWave. So let's lay this out now. The Watergate burglary team, the break-in that brings down a president, it's staffed almost entirely by veterans of Operation 40 and the Bay of Pigs. Sturgis, Operation 40. Barker, Operation 40. Martinez, JMWave. 300 runs to Cuba, still on the CIA payroll. Hunt, architect of the whole thing from day one. Now, these aren't people with a passing connection to Cuba operations. They are the Cuba operations. Same men, same methods, same handler, 11 years later. Now, there's something Hunt says after Watergate that's been largely overlooked. When the scandal breaks open, Nixon's people start talking about, quote, the Bay of Pigs thing, and it's not always clear what they mean. On the White House tape, Nixon tells his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, to pressure the CIA into shutting down the FBI's investigation of Watergate by telling them it'll expose the whole Bay of Pigs thing, whatever that means. Haldeman writes in his memoir that he believed that Nixon wasn't literally talking about the Bay of Pigs. He thought it was code for something else, something the CIA didn't want exposed. It's curious. And Hunt himself? Well, after Watergate, Hunt's asked about his past. His connection to David Phillips comes up. Phillips, remember the psychological warfare expert from the first meeting at Quarters Eyes? Well, he went on to become the chief of CIA's Western Hemisphere division. It's the highest rank that didn't require congressional approval. When asked about the anti-Castro Cuban organization, DRE, which Lee Harvey Oswald had contact with in New Orleans, Hunt says something revealing. He says Phillips ran the DRE for the agency, but then he catches himself. Says he thinks that's classified. Whoops. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, the JFK assassination is a topic where documented facts and interpretive theories get tangled together, and this episode isn't the place to sort all that out. We've done several videos on JFK. Check them out if you get a chance. But here's what is documented. Howard Hunt was a senior CIA officer with deep ties to anti-Castro operations. David Phillips ran psychological warfare operations that intersected with Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in New Orleans. Frank Sturgis was an Operation 40 veteran whose name appeared in assassination records for decades. And David Morales, El Indio, Phillips' top action officer at JMWave, he reportedly told a close friend something before he died that the friend found deeply disturbing. Morales died in 1978, right as the House Select Committee on Assassination was investigating these connections. His friend didn't believe that the death was natural. The HSCA investigator who was pursuing these leads, a man named Gayton Fonzie, spent years trying to prove that Phillips operated under the alias Maurice Bishop and was seen with Oswald in Dallas before the assassination. A Cuban exile leader named Antonio Veciana eventually confirmed it. Phillips was Maurice Bishop. So what does this all mean? It means the Operation 40 network didn't connect just to Watergate. It sits at the intersection of almost every major covert action controversy in the Cold War era. And we're not even done naming names. Not even close. So we've got Watergate, we've got the JFK connections, and we're just getting started. Because the Operation 40 roster doesn't stop at Washington, D.C. It goes global. And the first name I want to talk about is Felix Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a Cuban exile who joins the CIA as a young man and becomes one of the most valued assets in Latin America. He's trained at Fort Benning, Georgia. He participates in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and after the invasion fails, he keeps working. In 1967, the CIA sends Rodriguez to Bolivia. His mission is to help the Bolivian military track down the most wanted revolutionary in the world, Ernesto Che Guevara. Guevara left Cuba to try to spread revolution across Latin America, and by October of '67, he's been captured by the Bolivian Rangers with CIA assistance. Rodriguez is the last person to speak to Che Guevara before his execution on October 9th, 1967, and he takes Guevara's Rolex watch off his wrist as a trophy. He wears it for years. That's an Operation 40 veteran standing over the body of one of the most iconic revolutionary figures in the 20th century. and he's wearing his Rolex. But Rodriguez doesn't retire after Bolivia. He shows up again in the 80s at Ilopango Air Base in El Salvador. And what's he doing there? He's helping run the secret resupply operation for the Nicaraguan Contras. This is Iran-Contra. The Reagan administration is illegally funneling weapons to the Contras through back channels after Congress has explicitly banned it. And one of the key figures running the logistics on the ground in Central America, that's Felix Rodriguez. Same guy. The Bay of Pigs, Che Guevara, Iran-Contra, 3 decades, 3 continents, same operative. The next name is even darker. Luis Posada Carriles. Posada is another Cuban exile and CIA asset. He's trained at Fort Benning alongside Rodriguez. He works with David Phillips in Chile. He's involved in the Castro assassination attempts with Antonio Vecina. That's the same Vecina who later identifies Phillips as Maurice Bishop. But the timing that puts Posada on the map is what happens on October 6, 1976. Cubana de Aviación Flight 455 takes off from Barbados. It's a civilian airliner carrying 73 people. It never reaches its destination. 2 bombs explode on board, and the plane crashes into the sea. Everybody on board is killed. That's 73 people, including the entire Cuban national fencing team, 24 young athletes. It's the deadliest act of airline terrorism in the Western Hemisphere before September 11th. And the men behind it, Luis Posada Carriles and another Cuban exile named Orlando Bosch. Both have ties to the CIA. Both are veterans of the anti-Castro operations that grew out of Operation 40. Posada later escapes from a Venezuelan prison where he's awaiting trial for the bombing. He shows up in Central America working alongside Felix Rodriguez on the Contra resupply operation at Ilopango. Same network, same base, an accused airline bomber working a covert US government operation alongside a man who executed Che Guevara. And when an American cargo plane is shot down over Nicaragua in 1986, and the sole survivor, a man named Eugene Hassenfuss, starts talking, he reveals that a CIA agent known as Ramon Medina is working with Rodriguez at Ilopango. Ramon Medina turns out to be Luis Posada Carriles. Got that? Now the next name on the list takes us somewhere completely different. Barry Seal. Seal is a pilot from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He's been flying since he was a teenager, and by his early 20s, he's one of the youngest 747 captains in the history of TWA. But Barry Seal has a side job. He's a drug smuggler, and according to multiple sources, he's also CIA. Gerald Patrick Hemming, a soldier of fortune who operated in the anti-Castro world alongside Sturgis and others, confirms it. He says Seal was in Operation 40. Seal flew killer teams inside Cuba before the invasion to take out Fidel. And there's a photograph. January 22nd, 1963, Mexico City. It's the only known photo of an Operation 40 team together. And in that photo, according to researcher Daniel Hopsicker, you can see Barry Seal, Felix Rodriguez, Frank Sturgis, and a CIA operative named William Seymour. Seal goes on to become one of the biggest drug smugglers in American history. He's running cocaine out of Mena, Arkansas, making millions. And at some point, he gets caught. But instead of going to prison, he becomes a DEA informant. He flies sting operations for the government, including a famous one that produces photographs of Nicaraguan Sandinista officials loading cocaine onto his plane. The Reagan administration uses those photos as propaganda to justify funding the Contras. Same network, again. Seal gets assassinated on February 19th, 1986. He's shot to death in his car in Baton Rouge. The hit's carried out by a Colombian gunman. And on the same day Seal's killed, his assets, planes, ships, they're all repossessed in a coordinated operation through the Caribbean by the CIA, their true owner. Now the last name I'm going to give you might be the most surprising one of all, Porter Goss. Goss is a CIA officer in the early 60s. He works at JMWave during the anti-Castro operations. After leaving the agency, he goes into politics, becomes a congressman from Florida, rises to chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and in 2004, President George W. Bush appoints him Director of Central Intelligence, the head of the CIA, an Operation 40-era veteran running the entire agency. So, from a single CIA program created in 1960, we can trace a direct line to the Bay of Pigs, the execution of Che Guevara, Watergate, the deadliest airplane bombing in the history of the Western Hemisphere before 9/11, Iran-Contra, one of the largest drug trafficking operations ever, and the power of the CIA itself. Every thread leads back to the same group of men. The same training camps, the same handlers, it's the same agency. And the CIA's official position in 2014 is that they got 7 pages on this. 7 pages. We've traced the CIA program across 4 decades, from a Navy building near the Lincoln Memorial in 1960 to the Bay of Pigs, to a firing squad in La Cabana Fortress, to JMWave and the largest CIA station in the world, to Watergate, to a Bolivian jungle where Che Guevara takes his last breath, to a civilian airliner falling out of the sky with 73 people on board, to an airstrip in El Salvador where an accused terrorist works alongside a man on the US government payroll flying cocaine out of Mena, Arkansas, to the 7th floor of CIA headquarters. It's one program, same names over and over and over again, and there's a word for that. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you've seen it before. Danny Casolaro called it the octopus. We did a video on him. Check it out if you get a chance. Casolaro was a freelance journalist who believed that he'd uncovered a network of interconnected scandals, intelligence operations, arms deals, stolen software, drug trafficking. It's all linked by a web of covert operations who moved between government agencies, organized crime, and private industry. He was found dead in a hotel bathtub in Martinsburg, West Virginia in 1991. His death was ruled a suicide. His research files were never found. The parallels to Operation 40 are not subtle. We're looking at the same world. A covert program gets created with official authorization at the highest levels. It recruits assets from the intelligence community, the military, organized crime, political exiles. It operates with what the CIA calls plausible deniability, which means the people at the top can always say they didn't know. And when the program officially ends, the networks don't. The operatives find new missions, new funding streams, new handlers, and the institutional knowledge, the tradecraft, the contracts, the methods, they just migrate from one operation to the next. Bay of Pigs becomes JMWave. JMWave becomes Mongoose. Mongoose becomes the assassination plots. The assassination plots become Watergate. Watergate becomes Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra becomes drug trafficking. And at every single step, the same faces. Now, I mentioned Gordon Gray at the very start of this episode. He's on the special group that creates Operation 40. He's also on the MJ-12 membership list, and he's not the only overlap. Alan Dulles, the CIA director who approved Operation 40, is also named on the MJ-12 documents. Now, if you've been following this channel's work on MJ-12 and the Forrestal episode, you know that these names keep showing up in the same rooms, they making the same kinds of decisions about the same kinds of secrets. We built the Forrestal episode around the National Security Act of 1947, the law that created the CIA, the National Security Council, and the entire institutional framework that made programs like Operation 40 possible. Forrestal was the architect of that system, and 12 years after his death, the machine he built created Operation 40. That's the threat. The institutional power to classify, to deny, to neither confirm nor deny, comes from the same legal architecture. And it's still in place, because when John Greenwald filed that FOIA request in October of 2013, asking for everything the CIA had on Operation 40, the agency conducted a search. They found documents, 7 pages. And then they invoked Section 3.6A of Executive Order 13526. Also Section 6 of the CIA Act of 1949, and Section 102A, subsection I, subsection 1 of the National Security Act of 1947, Forrestal's Law. All to tell a researcher in 2014 that the very existence of additional records on a program from 1960 is classified. Not the content, the existence. They won't even tell you if there's more to find. I'll tell you straight out, I don't know what's in those files. Nobody outside the agency does. But I know what's in the public record. And the public record shows a CIA program that produced all this crazy stuff we just went through. And from one operation created in 1960, authorized by a president, overseen by a vice president, and protected by a classification system that was designed from the very beginning to make sure you'd never find out. 7 pages. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.